Okay, so was it normal for biblical men to have multiple wives and or multiple concubines? The answer is no. Okay? It was not normal for biblical men to have multiple wives and or multiple concubines. And I want to explain to you why it was not normal. And I'm going to do it first archaeologically, and then I'm gonna come back and explain it biblically. But real quick, just in case you're new here, I just want to let you know that I'm Erica, and this is Just So You Know. And here, we're all about talking about biblical archaeology. So if you haven't already, make sure you're subscribed and make sure you're following me across all of my other social media platforms, just so you don't miss out on anything. All right, so let's talk about why it was not normal for biblical men to have multiple wives and or multiple concubines. Let's go. So for my thesis, for my master's degree, I looked at the sexual practices of the ancient Israelites during the Iron Age. And when I say Iron Age, I'm talking about the time period of King Saul, King David, King Solomon, like all of the kings. That's the Iron Age. The title of my thesis was Sexuality and the Pillared House. You see that? Let me tell you something. Literal blood, sweat, and tears went into writing this thing. So anyways, while I was working on my thesis, I ended up writing and presenting a paper where I explored how many sexual partners an ancient Israelite could have at one time. And I know this video is supposed to be about wives and concubines, but within the context of ancient Israel, who you could have sex with is who you could and would marry. So in this video, when I'm talking about sexual partners, I'm also talking about a spouse, okay? All right, so I explored how many sexual partners an ancient Israelite could have. So first off, I looked at this archaeologically. And when I say archaeologically, I'm talking about looking at ancient demographics or ancient population numbers, because if you want to know how many sexual partners a person could have, you got to first look at how many people was around to begin with. Now, like I said before, my paper focused on the biblical period known as the Iron Age, which is the years 1200 BCE to 586 BCE. As you can see, this is a large period of time, and it covers a vast majority of the biblical books of the Old Testament. Like I'm talking Judges and Ruth, 1st and 2nd Samuel, 1st and 2nd Kings. You've got the major prophets like Isaiah, Jeremiah, and even quite a few of the minor prophets like Amos, Obadiah, Hosea, or Zephaniah, just to name a few. So keep that in mind as we look at the population sizes of this time period, because we're talking about a huge chunk of the Old Testament, okay? And by the way, if you want a more detailed discussion about the biblical timeline and where each of the books of the Bible fall within this biblical timeline, check out the Archaeology and the Bible, the Biblical Timeline video on my channel. Now, when it comes to figuring out ancient populations, it would have been nice if we had a bunch of ancient records that were detailing where people were and how many people were there. And honestly, we do have a few. We've got the Amarna letters. We've got some population records from the Assyrians and the Babylonians. And for the New Testament period, we've got some records from the Romans. And these are wonderful, don't get me wrong. I'm not hating on these. These are massively significant archaeological finds, but they don't give us a whole picture when it comes to populations. They only give us a glimpse. So to fill in these gaps, researchers have to rely on the size of ancient villages or ancient cities, and then they have to use something called a density coefficient. And a density coefficient is just something used to estimate how many people typically lived per unit of space. Anyways, based on these sizes of these ancient villages and ancient cities that archaeologists have found, and using a density coefficient of about 100 to 200 people per acre, we know that people within the biblical world lived in small villages that were about 50 to 300 people in size, with the average hovering somewhere between 125 and 155 people. Now, having more than 300 people was not impossible, it was just the exception and not the rule. And I know I said I was focusing on the Iron Age, but I did want to drop this in. During the time of the patriarchs, aka the Middle Bronze Age, aka the time of Abraham and Isaac and Jacob and Joseph and them, the average village size was about 175 people. So even though that's a different time period, I just wanted to show you that throughout most of the Old Testament in general, most people were living in small villages. All right, so here's where we're at. Most people lived in small villages that consisted of about 125 to 155 people. For the sake of this video, I'm gonna just run with the higher average, 155 people, as we look at how many sexual partners these people could have had within these villages. So, in a perfect world, in a heteronormative culture, and that just means that the normal expectation was for people to pair up with people of the opposite sex. If it was a perfect world, you'd be looking at a population that was pretty evenly split between men and women. So with a village size of 155 people, we would be looking at about 77 men and 77 women. And since ancient Israel was very much a heteronormative society, this is the type of setup that we would be working with if it were a perfect world. But research has shown that it was not a perfect world. As a matter of fact, women in ancient contexts had significantly higher mortality rates. And this was primarily because of complications that occurred during childbirth, but it was also because of other related diseases as well. And archaeologists get this type of information because they're studying ancient burial sites and looking at ancient skeletal remains. So for pre-modern societies, females' life expectancy was between 20 and 30 years old, while for men, it was about 40 years old. So in a village of about 155 people, it was highly unlikely that there would be this even 77 to 77 split. It was probably something like 80 men to 74 women, or maybe 87 men to 67 women, or whatever. The exact numbers could vary, obviously. The moral of the story is this, that within the world of the Bible, men would typically outnumber women. And this means that the options for sexual partners for men was pretty limited to begin with. Now, this limitation is based on the archaeological or demographic information alone. Let me tell you something. It gets a lot more limited once we apply cultural limitations like religious restrictions or economic restrictions. The cultural limitations of ancient Israelite sexual partners are reflected in the Bible itself. Like in Leviticus 18 and 20, we get the incest boundaries. From this text, we know that men were not supposed to have sex with their mother or stepmother, sister, and I'm talking full sister, half sister, or stepsister, aunts, their daughter-in-laws, their sister-in-laws, or any women in a mother-daughter pair or grandmother-granddaughter pair. So like if you was with a woman, you couldn't be with her mama, or if you was with a woman, you couldn't have sex with her daughter, nothing like that, right? So no mother-daughter type pair. And you couldn't have sex with a sister pair. So like if you were one sister, you couldn't get with the other sister. These are the incest boundaries based off of Leviticus 18 and 20. So imagine a man is living in a village of about 155 people, and it's about 80 men to 74 women on a good day. Because remember, there was likely to be less women than there were men. If a man was living in this size village, if any of these women within the incest bounds were still alive and living in the village, that would automatically eliminate like 5 to 6 women from the available pool of women. That would drop the number of women from like 74 to down to maybe about 69 to 68 women. But we're not done yet, y'all. On top of these incest restrictions that I just named, you've got to add that you could not have sex with another man's wife. Let me tell you something. What the Bible don't play about is having sex with somebody else's wife. I mean, seriously, you see a lot of anti-adultery language within the entire Bible, let alone the Old Testament. I said all that to say that you definitely couldn't have sex with a married woman. And by the way, a woman that was engaged or betrothed to be married, she was considered to be married as well. So let's keep it conservative and say that half of the women that a man wasn't related to, let's say half of those women was married as well. That would leave us with about 34 to 35 women. So once we remove all of the women that a man is related to and the married women from the pool of potential sexual partners or potential wives or concubines, what we're left with are the unmarried women, the widows, the slaves, or sojourners. But we do have to consider that some of these women were probably not within the marriageable age. Meaning some of them could have still been children or babes, or some of them could have been past their childbearing years. So let's say, generously, let's say about 10% of these women, that's 4 to 5 of these women, let's say that this many women fell outside of the marriageable age range. That would bring us down to around 30 women. And someone might say, hey, 30 women is a lot of women to choose from, right? No, it's not. Let me tell you why. First off, if you want to get with one of these free women, you have to first consider the bride price. This is what I was talking about earlier when I was talking about economic limitations. Taking a wife, taking a sexual partner came at a financial cost. And even if you were foolish enough to have sex with a girl before you married her, you were still gonna pay a cost. According to Deuteronomy 22, verses 28 through 29.
Actually, guys, I made a mistake here. What I meant to say was Exodus chapter 22, verses 16 through 17.
It says that if you was foolish enough to sleep with this girl before you married her, you had to pay her father and marry her, unless her father didn't want you to marry her. So yeah, a man couldn't just go get with a woman and have sex with her just because she was free. If he did cross that line, it was gonna affect his wallet and his life. So ancient Israel was definitely not like a hookup culture, okay? If you sexed the girl, you married the girl, and you was gonna pay some money. And let's be clear, even if he had the funds, the man didn't just have a full free pick of all of the free available women, y'all, because he wouldn't have been the only man looking for an unmarried woman, because we gotta remember that the men outnumbered the women because of the women's short life expectancy. So in a population of about 155 people, where there's about 80 men to the 74 women, and we apply the cultural restrictions, and then we also take into account the marriageable age of the women and the men, we'd be looking at something like 33 available men to 30 available women. In simpler terms, that's like 11 men to 10 women. And even if a man was like, hey, there's no women here, I'm gonna run to another village and try and get me a girl. We have to remember that he would most likely run into the same type of problems at another village because, again, this size village was the norm. Female life expectancy was short. That was the norm. So you're gonna have another space, another village where the men outnumbered the women. So even then in that situation, he would have to compete with the men of that village. The moral of the story is this. The idea of a man having multiple wives or multiple concubines or multiple sexual partners within the context of the biblical world, it just doesn't line up archaeologically, nor does it line up biblically. Honestly, when you think about it, he was doing good to get one. And I know some of y'all are like, well, what about Solomon? And what about David? Or what about Abraham? These men of the Bible had multiple wives or multiple concubines. And yes, you're right. These men did have multiple wives and some of them multiple concubines. But let's talk about it though. Almost every man in the Bible that had multiple wives or multiple concubines, almost all of these men were either wealthy and or powerful. Let me show you. Abraham, powerful and paid. Esau and Jacob, powerful and paid. King Saul, powerful, then paid. King David, real powerful, and then real paid. And then there's Solomon. Everybody and their mama like to talk about Solomon and his many wives and his many concubines. And of course, King Solomon was real powerful, and he was also really paid. Okay? But I want to throw this in there though. We have to remember that with King Solomon, a significant number of his wives were a part of political alliances. In the ancient world, marrying off your royal kids to another kingdom, that was like forming a treaty. It was like this idea of, we won't beef now with each other because we're family now through marriage. It was like that type of thing. So yeah, biblical figures like David and Abraham and Solomon, yes, they did have multiple wives, but we have to remember that they were the exception and not the rule. And here's the thing, the Bible does tell us that these men had multiple wives or multiple concubines, but it never really presents it in like this real positive light though either. Let me show you what I mean by this. Look at the drama that comes from Abraham and his situation, or look at the drama that comes from David and his situations. And we look at Solomon, who is the poster child for polygamy and all the situations that arose from his polygamy. The Bible says that he had 700 wives and princesses and 300 concubines, and his wives turned away his heart. And verse 4 goes on to say, for when Solomon was old, his wives turned away his heart after other gods. And if all of that doesn't really present the Bible's negative view about multiple wives and or multiple concubines, check out Deuteronomy 17:17, where God literally warns about this. He says to future kings, he must not take many wives or his heart will be led astray. Now, if that doesn't let you see that the Bible has a negative view about multiple wives, I don't know what else will. Looking at the archaeological data and the biblical data, we see a world where a man having multiple wives, multiple concubines, or multiple sexual partners, it was just not a very real possibility. And that's because, one, most people lived in small villages that would have potentially had it where men outnumbered women. And then two, because of the cultural limitations that we see reflected in the Bible. And even when we do see biblical examples of men with multiple wives or multiple concubines, these men are either wealthy or powerful or both. So, was it normal for biblical men to have more than one wife or more than one concubine? No, it was not normal. And we can see that it was not normal based upon the archaeological data and the Bible itself. And I'm not saying that it didn't happen. The Bible even tells us that it did happen. What I'm saying is that it was not normal, or it just wasn't common practice. So for my people out there that keep saying that the men in the Bible, they had multiple wives because you're just trying to, bring some support for having multiple partners, you should probably look elsewhere because the Bible ain't it. Sorry, not sorry. So hey, I would love to hear your thoughts. Let me know what you think about everything. Did it change your mind? Was it new information, or did you already know? Whatever. Just make sure you share in the comment section below. And if you like this video, make sure you hit the like button and be sure to share this video too. Anyways, thanks for watching. Love sharing this kind of stuff with you guys. And as always, this is just so you know.